If you've ever wondered how fast community spirit turns into straight-up theft, let me introduce you to the day an HOA tried to throw a full-blown campground party on my private lake, like they'd bought it at a yard sale. I'm talking RVS bonfires, bass-heavy music, kids tearing through restored moss like it was a trampoline park, and the HOA president sipping wine in a zero-gravity chair like she was the queen of public land. The wild part, they swore I was the one being unreasonable. My name's Randall Bishop, and I own the land out by Diamondback Lake, tucked up near the ridges where the pines get thick and the air smells like cold stone and sap. It's quiet out there on purpose. I rent a couple cabins to folks who want the kind of weekend where the loudest thing you hear is wind and cedar branches and maybe an owl getting nosy at midnight. The lake's not some random natural resource that happened to appear. My grandfather dug it back in 1931, built the dam, got the permits paid, the county fees, maintained it like a sacred thing. It's family work turned into water. That matters. So when my satellite phone buzzed one afternoon while I was halfway through replacing a busted trail sign near the western ridge, I almost ignored it. I don't usually pick up unknown numbers out there. The only surprise call you want is a buddy saying they're bringing beer, not trouble. But the area code was local, and something in my gut gave me that little cold nudge. "Mr. Bishop, you own the land by Diamondback Lake, right?" A woman's voice tight worried, trying not to sound panicked. "Yeah," I said. "Who's this?" "This is Lacey. My husband and I are renting your cabin near Cedar Grove. And there's a situation. A bunch of people just pulled in RVs, tents, coolers. They're saying it's an HOA annual campout. They're all over the lakefront. Music's blasting, bonfires. Nobody asked us anything. Nobody mentioned permits, nothing. I didn't even hang up properly. I just started marching for my truck like my boots were dragging my whole temper behind them. 12 minutes later, I hit the edge of the lake roads, and I'm not proud of how fast I took those dirt turns. My old F-150 groaned like it was personally offended, shocks, squealing gravel popping under the tires. Then halfway there, I heard it. That thump, thump, thump of bass, the kind you feel in your ribs. Not campfire guitar music, not quiet radio while you fish music. This was wedding reception chaos, beer and ego volume. When I crested the rise overlooking Diamondback, I slammed the brakes so hard my coffee launched itself into the dash. And there it was, at least 40 people spread along the shoreline, tents dotted like multicolored tumors, portable grills hissing under thick clouds of meat smoke. Kids were screaming and running barefoot through moss beds I'd spent years restoring, the kind that takes forever to grow back and about 3 seconds to ruin. Teenagers were waving sparklers like it was the 4th of July. Somebody had set a fire pit way too close to an ancient spruce, the roots exposed like knuckles. And dead center of the whole mess, reclining in a deluxe chair with a stemless glass of wine like she was at a vineyard, sat Karen Stiller. I knew her face instantly. 2 years earlier, she'd stood at a community meeting wearing pearl earrings. Pearls to complain about trail expansion like hikers were an invasive species. Karen was the president of Whispering Pines HOA, a woman who could turn the word wellness into a weapon. Back then, she'd tried to argue Diamondback Lake should be reimagined as a community hub. I told her no. She smiled like she'd filed it away. I parked, stepped out, and walked straight toward her without saying a word. My boots crunched over gravel and, yeah, beer caps. A Labrador ran past me dragging a rope toy and what looked like half a sandwich. Karen looked up and smiled like I was interrupting cocktail hour. "Well, Randall," she said, sweet as poison, "I was wondering when you'd show up. Lovely spot you have here." I stared at the smoldering fire pit near the spruce, then at the kids trampling the shoreline, then back at her. "You're trespassing," I said, flat as a shovel blade. Karen laughed. "Oh, please. This lake is within a designated natural resource zone, communal access, Colorado Public Access Framework. Look it up." "You don't get to invent laws like they're Pinterest quotes," I said. "This lake is artificial. My grandfather dug it. The dam, the banks, the whole thing private land. I've got the deed and the county maps." She waved a manicured hand like she was shooing a fly. "You can't gatekeep nature. The HOA already approved the campout. Quarterly vote budget, allocated itinerary set. You can't just show up and throw everyone out." I pointed at the metal sign posted 10 feet from her chair. Big letters, no drama, no fires, no overnight camping, no amplified music, Permit required. You didn't get a permit, I said. You're breaking county ordinances and the fire code. That alone is enough to get you cited. Her smile tightened just a flicker. You're being awfully dramatic. That's when I pulled out my phone and started recording. Not because I wanted a viral moment, I'm not built for that, but because I've been around enough nonsense to know the truth gets slippery the second someone decides to lie loudly. You've got 5 minutes to start packing, I said. After that, I'm calling the sheriff. Karen took a slow sip of wine like she was performing calm for an invisible audience, so I called. 20 minutes later, 2 county officers rolled in. One of them, Deputy Morales, had the kind of face that said he'd seen every flavor of entitled behavior and was tired of the whole menu. While we waited, I filmed everything: the open alcohol, the fireworks being handed to kids, the foot traffic cutting through restored areas, Karen trying to rally her campers into standing their ground. Morales asked for IDS permits, and then he looked at the laminated survey map I keep in my truck, property lines, markers, everything. He didn't even hesitate. This entire area is owned by Mr. Bishop, he told Karen. The HOA has no claim here. Karen's mouth opened, closed, opened again. But we've used this space before. We had a picnic in July 2018. I approved that I cut in because I did. One event, one time. Permission given, permission ended. Morales nodded. That doesn't grant permanent access. In the end, they issued citations $2,000 to the HOA for trespassing, a personal fine to Karen for violating the fire code, and an order to vacate immediately. The camp exploded into chaos. RVs lurched onto gravel paths. Kids cried. Someone dropped a cooler right into the lake like a final insult. Karen stood by her SUV red-faced, glaring at me like I'd kicked her dog. As she climbed in, she leaned out the window and hissed, "You just made a very big mistake. You think you're bigger than the community. You'll regret this." Then she peeled out dust rising behind her tires, and I watched it drift over the shoreline like a warning. I knew right then this wasn't over. 2 weeks passed. I repaired the fire-scarred soil, raked out the boot prints, refunded Lacey and her husband with a sincere apology and a bottle of local whiskey because it wasn't their fault they rented a cabin in the middle of a nonsense storm. Bookings dipped for a minute, then started creeping back up once folks realized I wasn't playing when it came to safety and boundaries. Then one morning an envelope showed up under my gate, thick paper, gold-embossed seal. Whispering Pines HOA Legal Counsel. I didn't even enjoy opening it, and I love opening mail about as much as I love stepping on a nail. Inside was a formal summons: Whispering Pines, Homeowners Association versus Randall Bishop. They were suing me for $100,000, claiming I'd obstructed natural community access, caused psychological harm to families, and this one almost made me laugh. Suppress community heritage events tied to location identity. Heritage. At my lake. That my grandfather dug. The audacity was almost artistic. I drove into town and called my attorney, Hank Caswell. Hank's a fourth-generation mountain lawyer who specializes in land rights and zoning disputes, the kind of man who can destroy you politely with paperwork and still have time to eat a sandwich. He read the complaint, grunted, and said, "This is going to be Olympic-level nonsense, Randall." But these HOA types love puffed-up language. Half the time it folds when you breathe on it. Then he flipped to the last page and frowned. They attached a map. On the map, the lake and 50 yards of tree line were shaded and labeled as a community easement. It looked clean, official, high resolution. It had a code number and referenced a zoning amendment Hank had never heard of. "Can they do that?" I asked. "If they can make a judge believe it's legitimate." "Maybe," he said. "But we can bury them in the truth. We need original property lines, historical documents, permits, everything." I had it all, deeds back to the 1920s, photos of my grandfather breaking ground, letters from the county water board approving the lake's construction. But what worried me wasn't just the lawsuit. It was the way the story was shifting. They weren't trying to win on facts, they were trying to win on perception. By the weekend, Whispering Pines had put out a glossy newsletter, hand-delivered like propaganda. A legacy interrupted. Our community fights for fair access. It was full of anonymous quotes about generations of lake memories, which was pure fiction, and it featured that doctored map like it was holy scripture. One line made my jaw clench so hard I thought I'd crack a tooth: when natural beauty is held hostage by the few, the community must act. Hank told me not to respond publicly yet. "Let them dig themselves in," he said. "Every PR move they make now becomes a shovel." Still, the pressure escalated. HOA members started walking the perimeter again, taking photos near the dam, scribbling in notepads. Some woman in business casual tried to hand me a clipboard survey about my willingness to participate in future eco-cooperative usage plans. Late-night calls came in no voice, just breathing, sometimes music. Then somebody left a bag of marshmallows and graham crackers at my mailbox with a note, "Can't wait for next year's campout." That was when I installed motion sensors at the entrance and infrared trail cams through the forest paths. I wasn't about to play defense in the dark. Hank and I set up a legal war room in the back of my barn, folding tables, document stacks, highlighters, blueprints, and that's when the first real twist hit. Hank opened his laptop one morning and turned the screen toward me. "Tell me this isn't what I think it is." A polished website, whisperingpinescamping.org. Join us for our 7th annual community campout. Photos of my lake, my trees, my docks, my cabins blurred like they were props. Fake testimonials, fake permit logos, a downloadable HOA traditions PDF claiming they'd been gathering there since 2017. I stood up so fast my coffee spilled. "That's my property," I said, voice shaking. "They're rewriting history in real time." I called an old buddy, Trevor Freelance, InfoSec, used to work for a government agency he never names. Within hours, he pulled server logs. The domain had been registered 2 weeks earlier, and buried in a sloppy directory was an email tied to Karen's personal Gmail. They hadn't even covered their tracks. I didn't know whether to laugh or scream. We printed screenshots, logs, everything. Hank added it to our counterclaim pile under fraud and misrepresentation. Then 2 nights later, my trail cams caught something else, people walking in a line near the northern boundary flashlights, off carrying a map, and what looked like a small drone. The next morning, I found a laminated sign staked near my dock, future site of Whispering Pines, environmental pavilion building, community through nature. No permit, no permission, just delusion nailed into my soil. That's when I understood this wasn't an argument, it was an attempted land grab. Repeat a lie long enough, plaster it on paper, put it on a website, print it in a newsletter, and some folks start acting like it's true. But they made one mistake. They assumed I was alone. A few days later, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. The voice was older, raspy. "It's Grayson Miller. We need to talk privately." Grayson was one of the original HOA board members. I'd met him years ago, back when Whispering Pines was still breaking ground. He was quiet, the kind of guy who asked permission before stepping over a rock wall. We met at a diner the next morning and he slid a folder across the table like it weighed 100 pounds. "They're going too far," he said. "Karen's got half the board convinced you're some kind of robber baron. The other half doesn't even know she's funding this lawsuit with reserve money. Inside were meeting transcripts, budget logs, private emails. One message from Karen to her attorney made my stomach turn. The lake's image is already public property now. He'll lose the narrative before he ever gets to court." Grayson looked at me and said, "I knew your father. Your land is yours. I won't be part of a con job." From then on, envelopes started showing up in weird places behind the third planter outside the post office, tucked under a newspaper at the diner. Internal minutes, invoices for a Denver PR firm labeled community outreach legal bills, hidden under maintenance. Karen was running the HOA like a monarchy with plausible deniability. One email to the PR firm burned itself into my brain. If we control the conversation, we win, regardless of the paperwork. So I changed tactics. If she wanted a narrative war, I'd fight with truth, quiet, heavy truth, the kind you can't talk your way around. I posted clear legal warning signs at every entry: private property, trespassing subject to prosecution, no camping, no fires, no music, no exceptions. Then I installed a steel-framed display box near the dock with a notarized copy of the original 1931 dam permit stamped by the county. Under it, a plaque. This lake and surrounding property were built, owned, and maintained by the Bishop family for over 90 years. No easement exists. All false claims will be met with legal action. And right beside it, because I'm petty in a way that feels righteous, I mounted laminated server logs showing the fake website was tied to Karen's email. 2 days later, her little QR code sign vanished like it had legs. Karen didn't back down, though. She doubled down. Grayson warned me she'd pushed a motion through the board to hire a land use consultant to evaluate public benefit opportunities around Diamondback. The words sounded polite, but the meaning was dirty. They were angling for eminent domain, getting the county to take my land and call it a park. A week later, a letter arrived from the county planning board, too polite, too clean, saying they were conducting a feasibility study for potential public benefit zones. Hank read it and actually slammed his hand on my barn table. "This is Karen," he said. "She's trying to weaponize bureaucracy." That was the moment I went public, really public. Not with a whining social media post, not with some desperate rant. I invited a retired journalist, Phil Huxley, out to the property. He ran an independent watchdog blog and podcast called Dirt Road Ledger. He lived for stories about power being abused behind friendly neighborhood smiles. I walked him through everything. The trespass campout, the citations, the lawsuit, the doctored map, the fake website, the trail cam footage, the feasibility study letter. Then I handed him Grayson's budget evidence showing HOA dues being diverted into PR consulting and legal fees without proper votes. Phil didn't say much while we walked, just took notes, filmed, snapped photos. But before he left, he looked at me and said, "She's been doing this a while, hasn't she?" 4 days later, his article dropped "The Lake That Wasn't Theirs, How a Colorado HOA Tried to Fake a Public Easement." And it blew up. Local news picked it up, then state level, then a national real estate blog ran a feature that basically branded Karen as a cautionary tale with hairspray. Within 48 hours, HOA board members started resigning. Residents demanded an audit. And then someone leaked the HOA group chat with Karen's messages front and center. If we don't establish precedent now, future boards won't have the leverage. Nobody will care about one guy with a cabin and a nameplate. We'll outlast him. Turns out people did care. The county backed off, issued a statement that the feasibility study was premature and would be paused indefinitely. Karen called an emergency HOA meeting, and Grayson recorded the audio. She was furious, wild-eyed, flipping through printouts of social media posts, accusing everyone of betrayal. Then a board member finally said what nobody had wanted to say out loud. "Karen, we never even had a community campout before this year. You made it up." She stormed out mid-meeting. That same night, I found a sheet of paper taped to my gate in bold red letters, "See you in court, Bishop. Or maybe in hell first." Fine, court it was. Hank filed our counterclaim: fraud, defamation, falsification of public records, malicious prosecution, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. And here's where the second twist landed like a hammer. The HOA's whole case leaned on that official-looking easement map. Hank's clerk dug into the signature on it. The county records clerk who supposedly signed it had died in 2019. But the signature date on the forged document was February 2021. That's not just sloppy. That's criminal. We pulled the original archives. No easement. Never had been. The official map hadn't been altered since 1987. A forensic examiner confirmed digital tampering. The overlay had different pixel density. The font was off by half a point. And the icing on the cake, the PDF's edit history showed the last person to modify it, Karen Stiller. When Hank submitted that to the judge and forwarded evidence to the district attorney's office, the air in the room changed. Suddenly, Karen wasn't just a loud HOA president, she was someone staring at felony territory. The final hearing day, the courtroom was packed, locals, HOA members, sitting stiff behind Karen reporters ready to pounce. Hank looked like a man who'd been waiting his whole life to dismantle someone with nothing but facts and patience. Karen showed up in a cream-colored suit, face pinched like she'd swallowed a lemon and lost the right to complain. The judge dissected the HOA's complaint line by line. Historical community use, one sanctioned picnic in 2018 dismissed. Natural body of water accessible under easement. Forged document dismissed with prejudice. Then Hank stood for our counterclaim and laid out the evidence like he was building a staircase out of their lies. Fake website logs tied to Karen's email doctored map. Misused HOA funds. PR invoices. Labeled as outreach, the county letter showing she'd attempted to submit the forged map into public archives. And then Hank dropped the detail that made the entire room go dead quiet. The land integration consultant, the HOA, paid. The primary shareholder was Karen's cousin. She finally flinched. Just a little, but it was there like a crack in glass. The judge's ruling came fast. HOA suit dismissed in full. Our counterclaim upheld. Karen ordered to pay $85,000 in damages plus my legal fees retroactively. Permanent injunction: she or any HOA representative barred from coming within 800 feet of my shoreline. Then the judge referred the case to the DA for potential criminal prosecution, document fraud, misuse of HOA funds, attempted public deception through falsified materials. Karen didn't speak. She just sat there blinking, small and pale, like the oxygen had been sucked out of her entitlement. Afterward, a few HOA members approached me in the hallway, apologizing, shaking their heads, saying they had no idea what she'd been doing with dues. I told them the truth, not cruelly, just honestly. You've got a lot of cleaning up to do. Outside, Grayson was waiting. He handed me a small box. Inside was a brass plaque he'd had engraved, Diamondback Lake Bishop Family Land, since 1931, still standing. I didn't throw a party. This wasn't that kind of victory. The reward was silence. The kind that settles over water when nobody's there to ruin it. That night I framed the court ruling and mounted it in a waterproof case next to the dock, right beside the original dam permit. Paper truth beside paper truth. I added one more sign, simple and cold. This land is private. You don't have to respect me, but you do have to respect the law. A year later, the trees feel taller. Maybe they always were, and I'm just finally breathing again. Karen's gone. Last I heard, the DA filed charges and she took a plea deal, no jail but heavy fines, and she was banned from serving on any HOA board in the state. Her house got foreclosed 6 months later, sold at auction. Fittingly, the new owner's a retired wildlife biologist. We had coffee once, good people, quiet people, the kind who don't confuse community with control. Here's the moral that sat with me long after the dust settled. Some folks don't want what's fair, they want what's theirs and what's yours, and what they can convince the world they deserve. And if you're not careful, they'll use friendly words, wellness, access, tradition, community, to dress up the ugliest thing in America, entitlement with paperwork. I used to think guarding my land was just about fences and signs, keeping people safe, keeping nature intact. Now I know it's also about defending truth itself, because the moment a lie gets printed, posted, and repeated, it starts acting like it owns the place. So let me ask you something, and I mean it. Where do you draw the line between community benefit and outright theft? And what would you do if a group with money lawyers and loud voices decided your home was suddenly everybody's shared resource? Drop your take in the comments. Tell me if you think I was too hard, not hard enough, or if you've ever dealt with an HOA that tried to bulldoze your rights with smiles and bylaws. And if you've got your own story, property disputes, neighbor wars, boundary lines, any of that, share it. I read them all, and I promise you, you're not as alone in it as you think.